Guest today is Michael Yander, the COO and co-founder of the Resume Sieve, an advanced AI-powered candidate evaluation platform that minimizes the time to find top candidates by ranking them based on requirements a firm provides. And folks, what we're going to be talking about today is how to present your information to an applicant tracking system so that the system gets you, understands how you get your ideas across, your experience across in a way that meshes with job requirements. Michael, welcome. Thanks for making time today.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff. Great day.
I'm glad you feel that way. So I know people refer to it as the black hole uh, because they're just throwing crap up at it. And the systems obviously have a way of looking at the data that people provide that allows it to figure out, um, whether or not a person might possibly fit. So I'm just going to ask the question in the naive way. Is it possible to get past the technology and get in front of a real person? Yes, of course, but you don't want to reject everyone.
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, it is possible to get past the technology. Of course, the technology is just looking for things in whatever it is that you've presented to it that match what it's been told to look for. And what people all too often forget about, because it just seems so easy, let me just throw my resume up there and I've got this great resume and I'm just going to throw it up there, not really thinking, does that resume actually match what they've asked for? Because their system is going to be different from the other system, is going to be different from the other system. It is putting work back on the job seeker. The reality is these systems are not all the same. They're not all looking for the same things. You have to be thinking about what is it that they ask to see, and are you giving that to them? It's up to you as the user or the candidate to put yourself in a position that the information that system is looking for is going to be found. That's the biggest thing that people lose track of. These systems, they're not doing this arbitrarily. It's not happening randomly. It's based on what is it that you've presented and whether or not it matches what they want. That's the broad answer. Now, there's some nuances we can go into, but that's the broad answer.
So I'm going to pause for a second and say, and the way these systems work, many people are curious as to whether or not this may be the wrong language, but it's language I'm familiar with, and others may be as well, whether they have a data dictionary of terms per job that allows the systems to say, okay, it may not say this, but if it says that, it's also going to be okay. Or does it actually have to say exactly that term?
So it depends on the system. And yes, those tools do exist. That's how our system works at the back end. It's got a list of similar synonyms or means the same thing kind of terms, so that you're not being excluded because you don't have exactly the term that is in the resume or is in the job description. So yes, that kind of capability does exist, as long as it's still within the same possibility, right? If they're looking for Java and all you've got is Python, there's no way to force those two things together. You need to have the Java in your resume or it's not going to work. I'm sorry. That's the nature of it.
So is that programmed by the company when they list the job within their system for filtration? How is that dictionary built?
Yeah. So the where the dictionary exists, typically it's coming from a third party. They're pulling that in from somewhere else rather than building it themselves. And how is it updated? Ours, for example, is updated through artificial intelligence. If it finds something in a resume it's never heard of before, it flags it, and then so research can be done to decide, does that belong in the taxonomy or not. So yes, that data is collected over time as the systems analyze the different applicants as they're going through their process. And so a good system is learning about the new terms, as opposed to something that's always just using the same things and not sort of keeping up with the changes in terminology that go on, for sure.
So, folks, I'm focusing on this because so often people wonder how these systems operate. Because let's say if it's an HR department, it posts a job and it has to add in terms that might be relevant to that specific position. I'll call it a synonym for
Yeah.
the term. And thus, people wonder if HR departments take the time to do that. And if you're saying that there is AI that employs machine learning that has identified synonyms proactively, the amount that HR does, because I respect them, they have a busy workday every day, 365. Uh, if they don't have to do the programming or they could do complementary programming to what the system identifies, it's not quite as difficult to get through.
Yeah. Yeah, the way you've described it is accurate. Again, for some, not all systems operate that way. Some have a sort of a standard list. I'll date myself a bit. Back in the day, I used to implement applicant tracking systems, and in the early days, you had to submit what the list was. Right? That's the way they worked, and the systems have gotten better over time. That you don't have to, at implementation, it's not up to the company, that there is a standard list that really helps. And it depends on the sophistication of the system. There's no blanket answer except to say, if the skill that they ask for isn't present in your resume, then you're going to be missed. You're going to be passed over probably for that particular situation.
So, in order to get through the systems,
Mm-hmm.
which is really what we're going to focus on. It's number one, a term that's going to exist within the taxonomy, the data dictionary, uh, that would identify you as being qualified.
Yes.
And then from there, I have the idea, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I am, that the earlier in the resume the term appears, the more likely the system is to rank someone higher in the ranking system. Or does it not matter? Have I
It
been
it
wrong about that?
I would say that it doesn't matter where it appears in the resume, depending on how the ranking is done. Typically, the ranking is going to be based on not just frequency but recency. And so, if you're looking for someone with Java programming, but the last time they did it was, 5 years ago, is that really a current skill? And so, a lot of the ranking tools now are looking at two things: duration, how long did you have it? It's not just that you had Java, but did you do it for 3 years? And so it's trying to calculate the time that you exhibited Java according to your resume. But then how recently was that Java present? So those are two factors that are critical. So it's not physically where it is in the resume. It is important where it occurs in your personal chronology, right? And so in some ways that's kind of the same thing that you're saying, Jeff, right? My most recent job, I did Java, so it would probably be the first job that's on the list of my resume. Sure. But the system's going to look at the dates. It's not going to look at where it sits on the page. It's going to look at the dates that something occurred. Although this speaks to, how do you build a resume that is more machine likable? And one of the ways to do that is to do things to make the resume simpler. There was a period where it was all about the appearance of the resume, purple paper or fancy font or other things, right? That's great if you're trying to attract the attention in a pile of paper and you want yours to stand out, so someone pulls that off the list and looks at it a little more carefully. The machine doesn't care what the resume looks like. It really doesn't. I mean, the simplest thing in the world would be just do it in text, and with just basic blocking and formatting, because that makes it easier for the machine to read. If you've been a recent job applicant, you'll know this, that there are some systems that, pardon me, are just really stupid. You put your resume in because you think it's going to populate your application, and what it gets is your name, and about nothing else. Your education's in the wrong place. You didn't go to that school. That wasn't a bachelor's degree. That was a certificate. You know, if one thing that I've discovered through some experimentation is, let's say you've been with the same company for several years and you've had several different jobs. A lot of these systems don't understand how to break that down. So you get, the first job, and then it just these sort of random fields. You end up filling out the whole application all by yourself. So it gives you a sense of how the machine is reading it. Make it simple. It chronological really helps. Make sure that the dates are very clear that you did something, and if you had particular skills that you were exercising, things like, we don't, maybe we'll say Microsoft Office, because you're either using Google or Office, right? Pretty much. And it'll be down somewhere at the bottom of your resume. But if that's a key requirement for the job, does it appear with any of the work that you've done that you were using Microsoft Office tools to do this project or to complete this task? The system doesn't know. The system isn't going to connect those dots. Your resume has to really connect the dots. And so it's what we move towards is, what did you do, but then what were your skills? Well, the problem is, now that you've disassociated your skills from your experience, you don't get ranked as high for your skills because there's no
Correlation.
no duration of them or any recency. And so the system just says, well, you don't have that skill, or yeah, you have it, but I'm not going to give you many points for it.
So let me pose a scenario, and I'll use the example of a LinkedIn profile and how it attempts to deal with that person who's been with a firm for 5 years and has held 3 different roles within those 5 years. And in role number 1, the oldest one, I'll use the technology example that you did. They did Java development work, and they did that for 1 year. And then there's the next job, the next most recent role that they've had within that firm. Let's say they worked with Python for 2. And the most recent job within that one organization, they're now a project manager running a project that uses whatever it is. Will the system identify, number one, that this is one company with 3 roles underneath it, and be able to identify how long a person has worked with those skills within that firm? Or can something else be done to demonstrate that fit for the system?
Yeah, that's a very real example of how people's careers grow. And so typically what the system is going to do is it's going to say, well, they had 1 year of Java 3 years ago, and then they had 2 years of Python, and then for, say 3 years they've been a project manager, but they're not going to get credit for unless they say that they've been managing Python projects or they've been managing Java projects. They're not going to get additional credit for additional experience with the underlying skill set. Project management is a skill set in itself, sure, absolutely. And are you a technical project manager, or are you a management project manager, right? Are you doing something around implementation, or something around designing an HR process flow or something? I'm just making things up. If you don't distinguish what it is, the system doesn't know. It's not going to make assumptions around what those things mean. It's just going to give you credit for what it can see generally, which would be just the little piece of Java, a little piece of Python, and then the project management. And but again, it depends on what the job is asking for, right? If the job is asking for a technical project manager, the fact that you've got Python and Java experience may not be really relevant as long as you were a technical project manager. But does it say that you were a technical project manager, or does it just say that you were managing a project? Does it say that these were the technologies that you were responsible for to ensure that whatever? Again, it's about understanding what the requirements are asking for and making sure that you're telling that story. If the only thing to show is your resume, does the resume tell the story that the job description is looking for? If it doesn't, the machine is not going to make those connections. And by the way, nor is a recruiter. Recruiter's not going to make those connections either if the recruiter is reviewing it, because not all applicant tracking systems eliminate or evaluate and eliminate candidates. Some do, and there are some bolt-on systems that people are using to simplify this process. Something or someone is going to be looking at, if they can't see what they want in your resume, they're going to discard it and go on to the next one, whether it's a machine or whether it's a person. That's what's going to happen.
I agree. And as someone who worked in recruiting for as long as I did, when I got resumes and I wasn't sure, what I developed were, I don't want to call it an autoresponder because it was a process where I had questions lined up in advance that I would send off to people, maybe compliment them for a specific job and say, you know, it's unclear from your resume how much you've done with such and such in your role as a project manager. How long have you worked with this, or did you work with this as a PM? How technical were you as a PM? I would send off questions rather than call because I hated playing tag. And now you can't even get through it if you make a phone call. So you've got to do it in some electronic way to communicate. And that just slows everything down for people.
Right. I was talking to a CEO yesterday. He's got a very small company. He posted a job for COO. He got 1,000 applicants. Do you think he's going to take the time to go back and ask anybody who isn't immediately apparent with the right skills? He's going to ask him any questions? He doesn't have time. 1,000 applicants for a COO position. And then, even today, right? You say, well, we've got all these jobs open and we've got less people than there are jobs open. Well, that doesn't reduce the number of applicants you get for particular jobs. There still are instances of 100, 200, 300 applicants showing up for a job. How do you get through them? Well, I guarantee you today, there's no recruiter in the world that's looking at 300 applicants and then asking questions of those that didn't have a resume that met their expectations on first pass. It just isn't going to happen, right? They're not even going to look at all 300 resumes. If they don't have some way of rank ordering those resumes based on the requirements that their hiring manager has defined, they're going to develop a system, right? Oh, I'm going to look at every third resume. I'm going to take the first 50 and I'll take the first 5 out of the first 50. All these things that the recruiter tricks just to get through it, because there's also, there are legal issues that you can't evaluate people differently. And so recruiters, they've learned how to deal with these large masses of resumes, and now the systems are helping them. I'm doing air quotes for the audio version of this podcast. And often what it's doing is it's eliminating people because their resume doesn't show what it is that they're looking for. That's the fundamental issue. Are you showing them what they're looking for? If you're not, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to try and go beyond the resume. This isn't like you're at a job fair, you're chatting with somebody and you're getting a little bit more information. This is a grinding out process of large numbers, and that means that people are going to be looking for shortcuts. And the shortcuts are, do you have what I'm looking for? If you don't, I'm not going to talk to you. Because even if you have what I'm looking for, it doesn't mean that you're qualified. I still have to go through that evaluation, because maybe you do have the right kind. You've done Java, but you've been in fintech, and I'm looking for somebody who's understands the hospitality space. So that you've got that whole aspect of it. Even if you've got the core skills, that's still not enough, right? Then the experience comes into it. Maybe what school did you go to? Maybe where you live. Those kinds of things. The other factors. The skills are just the easiest thing to validate today from a system perspective.
You said where you live. It's looking for zip code to see proximity or something else?
It can. Yeah. That's a pretty common thing to do, to be able to do geofencing today, where there is a, sort of an on-site obligation. You see this particularly in the staffing industry more so than in the perm hire industry, where, you need to be near so that you can get to these jobs, right? But it's a pretty common kind of thing that I want people who are going to be able to come into the office. My office is in, Redondo Beach and in LA. And so I know that means that you can't be more than 10 miles away or it's not good commute distance. I mean, I'm just making that up, but that's actually probably a pretty good scenario for Los Angeles. That's the kind of thing, I need somebody who's in my state because I need certain state licenses. Sure. So geofencing is pretty common. And there's a trend in resumes which is around people's privacy, not to put address information. Okay, well, then if there's a location requirement that a system is looking for, you might be knocking yourself out. And so sort of the middle ground is city state zip, are pretty common as a sort of a halfway point. You're not giving up your street address because concerned about privacy and all. Okay, I can understand that. And there are people who will knock you out because you don't. I mean, I've seen many jobs lately where it's, do you live within commute distance of this job? Well, what do you define as commute distance, and does your resume reflect that?
I know when I still did recruiting, I wanted a zip code because it wasn't necessarily for the current job. But once you were going to reside in my database, and I was going to try and search my database on a later occasion to find you, without a zip code, I wasn't going to be able to do it. I was in New York City, and with Long Island and New Jersey and the 5 boroughs, it isn't like, I'm going to do a search that says New York, New York, because all that is Manhattan.
Right.
I now have to deal with all the towns in New Jersey. And if I don't have a zip code, even if I entered the zip codes as a search string, I wouldn't be able to find you.
Right,
so
right.
I'm
And
not,
it can make a huge difference. Princeton versus Weehawken.
big difference.
There's a commute. Just to show our East Coast knowledge, Jeff.
Charlotte and Asheville. How's that?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, both in North Carolina, but boy, you wouldn't want to commute between the two of those. That's
No,
for sure.
not with the traffic to Charlotte.
That's it.
Titles. Oh, actually, before I go into titles, fonts.
Mm-hmm.
Fonts are always an area of debate with job hunters as to what font their resume should be in. What is easiest for systems to be able to read?
The systems are pretty smart. You start to run into issues when you get into the really fancy fonts, the scripts and whatnot, because that assumes that the system has that font available to it. So, if you're using the standard, Helvetica comes to mind, but when you open up a Word document, there's a default font there. It's the pretty standard, just your basic text kind of font it is what you want to go for. Just in case, you don't want to be some, dingbats or, one of those that it looks really cool. There's one for the Addams Family, and it's all very gothic, but it's got all these, is the system going to be able to understand what that looks like? You're asking a lot for a system to be able to read something that is not, is not your core. Before I ask your next question, let me just add one other thing about appearance. This is something that people it's a subtlety people aren't used to. Almost all the systems now can read PDFs as well as, say, a Word document or a Google document. Not all PDFs are created equal, are they?
Yeah.
There's a PDF which is where you've saved it as a PDF, and that's machine readable. What some people do as a shortcut is, instead of saving as a PDF, they print it as a PDF, and then they save that. Now what you've done is you've saved a picture, and the system can't read a picture. And so I was working with an HR manager with our tool, and he couldn't figure out why our tool couldn't read the resumes that he was handing us. Well, he didn't understand the distinction. So what he was doing is, instead of downloading a PDF of the resume, he was printing the PDF. And so now you got a picture, and that picture can't be read by any system these days. It's remotely possible the system could be sophisticated enough that it could do some sort of OCR, optical character recognition, but you're really taking a chance if you're, I understand why people send PDFs, it's a little smaller, right? So it's easier and more portable, and somebody can't alter it and whatnot. However, make sure that it's a real PDF and not just a picture. Just a little tip.
And how about columns? Because there are certain resume styles with multiple columns. And let's say the left column has a person's name and address and all the contact information. And there's the core column that has their data. Are systems generally able to read those, or does, and I heard you say
It's
earlier, simple is
yeah.
always better.
Yeah, sophisticated formatting can be problematic. The you know the system's looking for words. It's not looking for design necessarily, and so the simpler you can make it, the easier it is for the system to read the output. Columns can be problematic depending on what you put in the column. So if, as you just described, you've got some name and address information, okay, well, that's pretty readable, and the system's going to recognize it. And then you've got sort of your job history. But if you're breaking things up, and you're doing something here and something there, anytime again, those are tricks for the human eye if you want to attract attention to your document. Although, again, consider if you're sending your resume to a recruiter and you've made this sort of weird formatting. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say weird. You've made this
Atypical.
unusual formatting, atypical. It's going to be harder for the recruiter to analyze that document. And so the recruiter is going to be doing a quick scan saying, you know what, I don't see what I want. Boom, away it goes. That's what you got to watch out for. You want it to be as easy as possible for your document to be digested, because I won't say it's no longer about appearance, because boy, watch spelling errors, watch grammar errors, all those kinds of things. But beyond that, the logos of the company you worked for, nobody cares about the logo. The system's not going to look at the logo and do anything with it. The
It's
name
a,
should, the name is important, sure. I mean, if you've worked for General Electric and General Motors and IBM and Xerox, and you want a big job with a big company, yeah, you should have those kinds of things on there. But you don't need the logo. Who cares?
it
Things to think
was,
about. It makes it easier to keep your resume up too, right? I mean, with if you take away this whole, it really has to look fancy kind of thing, it makes it easier for you, recognizing that you need to be looking at that resume content differently for every job that you apply for. And so you want to make it easy for you to modify. That's the other thing to think about. Think about yourself. How am I going to maintain this monster that's got all these columns and spaces and graphics? That's why people don't. They just keep submitting the same resume and over again, because they've invested all this time in developing this really nice looking document that is not serving them in today's selection process.
you know, with the monster resume, and I don't mean the job board by that name. I mean the behemoth resume that
Yeah.
someone posts on a job board or someplace where they're trying to attract someone to them. I understand why people list everything, because they're trying to be magnetic and draw people to contact them. But when someone's applying, it's different. And you have to kind of think like the audience. What do they care about?
Yes.
What is the audience? What matters to that audience? And you can minimize everything else. You may not want to delete it, but you minimally want to minimize it, right?
Absolutely right. There's a functional limit. Again, the systems aren't going to care as much as the recruiters are going to care. If your resume is at 3 pages and potentially going longer, well, good for you. You've done a lot of interesting things in your life, but no one is going to go through that with the loving care that you put into creating it. They're going to be looking at what have you done in the last 5, 10, depending on the kind of job, maybe 15 years. I will admit, my resume covers less than half of my work career, because I'm sorry, does someone really care what I did in 1981?
Nope.
They probably don't, because it's certainly no longer relevant. The
And
fact,
the other part to that is when they get to the point of actually reading the doc, human nature is they're looking for something within one, maybe two page downs. And
exactly.
beyond that, they think the experience is too old.
Oh wait, how many pages do you go through when you search in Google? Do you go much past the first page? It's the same thing, and that's and even scrolling. How far do you scroll? Just think about how you consume information. If what they're looking for isn't immediately apparent in a quick glance, they're not going to find it. That's the problem. Now, again, machines will be a little different, and so you might be able to get away with a little bit longer, but the challenge is the job seeker, unless you're really digging into the system, you don't know how your resume is going to be evaluated. You don't know whether it's the ATS that's going to evaluate you or it's a recruiter that's going to evaluate you. So you really have to be thinking about what's the best way to present me, irrespective of who's going to be looking. Is it going to be a machine? Then I need to make sure that everything is neat and clean and easy to read. If it's a recruiter, oh, by the way, neat and clean and easy to read, that works for recruiters too. So these are not, you're not working at odds here. Oh my gosh, I don't know. Is it a recruiter or is it a machine? It doesn't matter. The objective is the same: neat and clean and easy to read. Pretty simple.
And I'm sure we both understand in certain fields where graphic design is important. Yeah. Those are the exceptions. Most people, absolutely, it's right. Not the issue. And what you can do is submit a standard resume with a link to the attractive resume, because you have some place that you're hosting your resume and portfolio, right? So that becomes an easy way to get around you feeling badly about sending a primarily text resume.
Well, and I think you will find that for those kinds of jobs, they give you the opportunity to upload additional documents to support your candidacy, right? Those are rare. And if that's the field you're in, then okay, these are general rules. You have to take into account the kind of jobs you're going for. There's no question.
Michael, this is so much fun. What haven't we covered yet that people need to know about? I'll call it getting through the system.
I think we've touched on this a couple of times, Jeff, but the core that I say to people is, as easy as it is to apply for a job, you need to really be focused. The best way to get through a system is to go around the system, unfortunately. And that means, looking at the jobs that you're applying for, are you really qualified? So, because if you're not, you're probably going to get rejected. And do you want all that rejection? Do you really want all that rejection? Are you really qualified for the job? And are there other ways you can get into that company? For example, if you're looking at jobs on LinkedIn, you can almost always tell who posted the job. Are you connected to them? Do you know somebody who's connected to them? Is there another way to get your resume into them that doesn't involve going through an application process? This is about putting some thought into how you're presenting yourself, as opposed to just joining the rest of the crowd and hoping that somehow what you've done is going to rise you above. Even today, where there are lots of jobs available, the challenge is that a lot of the jobs that are out there are flipping hamburgers or scooping chicken. And I'm not putting those jobs down, because that's what runs our economy. The jobs that people want, the unique jobs, the jobs that pay more, there's still a tremendous amount of competition for those jobs. And you got to be thinking about, how do I rise above just what everybody else is doing, which is just applying. That's probably the most critical thing. And whether it's a system or whether it's a recruiter, that's what you got to be thinking about. How do I rise above?
The metaphor I use is, there's a big pond with a lot of fish, and there's a fisherman who throws one hook in the water, and all the fish are trying to jump on the hook, and only one is going to get there. Why would you put yourself through all of that? The other metaphor is, there's a front door, which is what most people try and get through. There's and that's where the bouncer is. Congratulations, you run a bouncer. There's a back door, which is referrals. And of course, there's a side door, which I'm not going to go into right now. There's a great Steven Spielberg story about how he got his first film deal. Yeah. And folks, you can go online and find this story. It is a fabulous metaphor for the side door. This has been great, Michael. How can people find out more about you, the work that you do, your firm, everything?
Sure. The usual ways. My email is michael@resumesieve.com. And ResumeSieve is resumesieve.com. Easy to find us on the web. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. So we're out there, and you can find us. Happy to connect with anybody who's interested, who can find me on LinkedIn as well, and be in a conversation. If you're looking for help or you're looking for ideas, happy to share.
Michael, thank you. And folks, we'll be back soon with more. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. Hope you enjoyed this interview. If you're watching on YouTube, give it a like, share it, do something that lets people know it was worthwhile. If you're listening to this as a podcast, the same thing. Do something that lets people know it was worthwhile. Also, visit my website, thebiggamehunter.us, where I've got a ton in the blog that'll help you. Plus, you can find out about my courses, books, and guides. Schedule time for a free discovery call or schedule time for coaching. I'd love to help you. Lastly, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/IN/the Big Game Hunter. Hope you have a terrific day, and most importantly, be great. Take care.